So, good morning, everyone. Today we have Mr. Aaron Carlisle with us, who's a senior experienced teacher at Robina State High School. Hello. Hi. How are you, Mr. Aaron?
Good, thank you, Priya. Hello, everyone. How you going?
Great. Good to have you here with us. Please tell us about yourself. What is your role as a teacher in the school and what grade levels you teach, and since how long you've been into this profession?
Okay, so this is my 16th year of high school teaching. I've been at Robina State High School now for going on 8 years. My specialist area is health and physical education, and I majored in humanities as well when I graduated. I've since picked up a postgraduate diploma in learning management, which has given me the third teaching area of industrial technology and design. Currently teaching senior phys ed and year
Okay.
10 phys ed, and I've got year 8 and 9 ITD technology classes. I'm also the sport coordinator at the school, which is I've basically taken off one line of teaching just to coordinate the inter-school sport at the school as well.
Great. So let's start with our first question. What do you think 21st century education looks like in your school?
So we've put a really big focus at our school around 21st century schooling, and I guess the key feature there is future-proofing students. So we look to have students graduate from our school with a love of learning, I guess, is the brief way to put it. We integrate innovative technologies into our schooling at all times, so we're very much trying to keep up with the technology of today. There's no point in dwelling on the technology that was yesterday. So always looking forward in terms of technology innovation. We also have a very strong international flavour at our school. So we have visiting students from other schools around, students who are on exchange and living with us and host families at the school, which gives us a great sort of outward scope, I suppose, for our students to be able to realise that there's more to the world than outside the school gates, and really get that love for the wanting to challenge themselves and travel the world as well. So in terms of our teaching practice, we'll go into a lot of things as the questions progress, but we're very much a database and performance-based school where we're constantly, as teachers, we're constantly challenging ourselves based on the data and the outcomes of the students to always improve and always have that student outcomes as the true north, I suppose, of where we're heading.
Oh, amazing, amazing. It's really good. I like that whole sort of scenario you provided me.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank you.
so we'll get to the next question now. So as we're talking about teaching cycle in our this interview, so my question for you is that how do you use this data to inform decisions for planning and teaching in a teaching cycle?
So we're very lucky these days as teachers to have so much data available to us, and this makes our practice in some ways easier because we can have a fair snapshot of our students even before we meet them at the start of a teaching cycle, whether it be the start of the year or the start of a semester, depending on the unit. But it also challenges us as well. We can't rest on our laurels because we're accountable towards that data. So it kind of works both ways. So first priority for me is if I do have a new class, we have access to our one school class dashboard, which gives us a snapshot of the students, even from their primary school days. So if we've got brand new year sevens coming into high school, we can see their progress all the way through year seven. This gives us a fantastic overview of their level of achievement for specific subjects, their literacy and numeracy through their NAPLAN results, any support provisions, their NCCD status, and any student profiles that have been developed through their school career up to that point. And it also allows us to make class groupings. So I guess that's the quantitative side of things. So we can look at students even before we've met them and know what sort of learner they are. But I also think the most powerful form of data in a classroom is your observational data as a teacher. So while we might be able to think we know a student by looking at their data even before they walk in the classroom, more powerful than that is getting to know your students, as much as you can really early on, because
Yes.
that gives you the best idea about how they're learning in your classroom. They might not learn the same way and respond with you as a teacher in a previous classroom, but how they're responding to you and your subject and your teaching environment. So we put a really big focus at our school around what we call connect before content. So we're
Yes.
connecting with our students before we're even trying to deliver the content. And I would say knowing your students and knowing how they progress is probably the most powerful form of data you can actually get.
Great, great. Yeah. So observation is like really, I must say that's a really good point. Okay, so let's move to the next question.
Sure.
How do you plan to incorporate engaging teaching strategies in the teaching cycle?
Yep. So again, it comes down to knowing your students. So what works with the group that you've got. And I know, for example, in the last couple of years, say, for example, I've had 2 year 8 classes, both doing the
Yeah.
same unit, both in the same classroom. It doesn't seem like there's going to be much difference there. The way I taught one class is completely different how I taught the next class, just based on the class dynamics and, the students that you have in there. So again, knowing your students and knowing what works is absolutely key. And I think on top of that, going back to your basics, going back to your structure. So we have clearly defined lesson goals and learning intentions for every lesson. So we use the Walt-Wilf method. I'm not sure if you've heard of that. So what are we learning today? WALT.
Yeah. Yes.
Incorporating that with a cognitive verb, and then WILF. So Wilf. How do I know? What are we looking for? How will the students know when they've achieved that learning goal? So if you can get students on board with that learning goal so they know where they're going,
Yes.
That makes your lesson content and your lesson structure so much more powerful, because they know where we're going and they know why. Is probably the more important point. Following this, I think variety is key. You really can't fall into the same groove every lesson in how you deliver your content. While structure and consistency is important, if you're doing the same thing over and over again, students get pretty bored pretty quickly. So, you need a variety of different teaching strategies there. We also adopt the gradual release model. So that's gradual release of responsibility from the teacher. So the basis of that is, I do, we do, you do. There's a few different models around that as well. So there's explicit teaching from the teacher, and then you release that responsibility. You model it and give an example. This is how I do it. Now you go with somebody else and you do it, and I'll guide you. And then you release again to say, all right, you're now doing that independently. And further from that, after that, when you've got students doing it independently, having them feed back to you how they think they went and why. Because that's pretty much self-assessment and peer assessment.
Yes.
So probably covered a lot in that question, but
Yes.
I think with those sort of basic structures and frameworks, then you can make lessons engaging for all students.
With your listening to your answer, I come up with a question. I really want to clear that thing with you.
Sure.
While we are studying, we get to, especially the engaging strategies, we mostly hear that, we mostly read that whenever there's a student who is not doing well in a class, they teachers usually pair them with a student who is working really well in the class. So when we pair these two students in a class, how well does this strategy works in real practice? Because I'm really looking for that answer.
I think it can work. Again,
Yeah.
I think you've got to be very aware of the two students involved. So I'm just trying to think of some of my students at the moment who I know that do need more attention, do need more support. If I was to put them with one of my high-flying students, I don't think it would go all that well. You've got to be careful of the dynamics and the personalities that you've got in play there. If those two students are already getting along well and they've got some sort of relationship, then yeah, absolutely. But I think the theory, definitely works. The dangers, I suppose, are if you've got a student who needs extension, then it's your responsibility as a teacher to provide that extension for that student as well. Are you holding them back by, asking them to support another student? I think that's where you probably have to be aware. So yeah, I have seen it work, and it probably would work in a lot of occasions. But again, knowing your students is probably key there.
Thank you for that. Yes. So we move to the next question. How do you provide differentiated teaching and learning opportunities in the teaching cycle?
Yep. So I keep saying it, but again, going back to knowing your students, once you've got that, if you can, and I don't know what sort of level we're talking about here, but if they're an NCCD student who requires high support, then they would already have an established student profile around the teaching strategies that work. So you'd be accessing that, and there's a massive range of different strategies. So it comes down to little things like chunking information, right? So you're giving your instruction to the students. That maybe around 60-70% of students have picked up on that instruction, are able to go and do their work. If you can chunk that even smaller and repeat your instructions, then you're probably getting that extra 10-15% who might need it. Students above that have probably got perhaps even a teacher aide in the classroom who can help them as well. So I think the most effective strategies towards differentiation has to be in the planning stages, though. It's really difficult to think on the fly when you're in the classroom about how you can adapt that strategy. So, for example, I've got a student at the moment in my class, my industrial technology and design class, who's wheelchair bound, has cerebral palsy, has very limited motor skills, and he has a teacher aide with him all the time, which is great. But again, I've got to think beforehand. All right, so his dexterity is very low. He doesn't have the fine motor skills to be able to hold a chisel and a hammer at the same time. So how can I adapt that towards him? So forward planning comes into it. And look, a lot of the times as well, you will try a strategy with a student around differentiation and find that, that didn't work. So, you've got to review and refine there again. So it's an ongoing cycle of planning, implementing, reviewing, and then you end up building a bit of a profile in your own classroom about how students will respond through that differentiation.
I totally agree that in real practice, it's totally different from what we think while studying.
Look, absolutely. We're dealing with, adolescents at the end of the day. We're dealing with kids, and often the best laid plans for a Thursday period 4 class, throw it out the window. But, you just have to take that as it comes and constantly, review and refine what you're doing.
Yeah, amazing. Yes, so we'll head to the next question.
Sure.
How do you select your assessment tools and how do you use them for the feedback?
Okay, so feedback's so important. I've learnt probably in the last couple of years as I've more started teaching in the senior area, how much they're relying on feedback. The frustrating part there is that, you can spend time reading student work as a draft and provide them with feedback, and then you get the final and they haven't implemented it at all. So that is a bit of sometimes you get that challenge, but in general, I find students these days, probably more so than when I started my career, are asking for specific feedback. So I think, I mean, I can only speak for our school, but I think we've taught them that process consistently across our school, that the drafting process has to be on time, and then, we're giving feedback to them before their final assessment. I think students learning how to self-assess and peer assess is also a huge part of that.
Yes.
So, rather than students solely relying on the feedback we're giving them, we spend a lot of time, particularly with my Year 12s at the moment, explicitly teaching them the ISMG towards their final assessments. Yeah. So we do that through worked exemplars, through working through samples of work from previous years, and giving them the opportunity to look at a finished product for that assessment, aligning that with the ISMG, and then them providing feedback to you to go, well, I think this is sitting around a 16 out of 20, or it's a 20 out of 20, or whatever it might be. Spending time to do that in class is really powerful, because that, as a teacher, they're not relying so much on your feedback. They're able to give feedback to themselves and feedback to each other, which is really important.
Yeah.
In practical work, so I'm thinking around my technology subjects, before we get to starting a final project, we'll give students a lot of opportunities to practice. So if they're working on, finger joins, something like that, so cutting and chiseling, giving them a lot of practice and a lot of opportunity to fail and succeed is really important. And I try to establish with my class that, a student can come up and show me their piece of work and say, it's really, really good because, it's square, it's fitting in nice and tight, or I stuffed this one up because I didn't mark it out properly. So yeah. I think, taking the time to really teach students how to provide themselves with feedback and feedback to each other is also just as important as the feedback you give them as a teacher.
Great. Yes. So the next question from my side is, how do you make judgments on the quality of student work and engage in moderation practices?
Yeah, so moderation's key, absolutely key. And again, it's probably something I've learned more so working in the senior world in the last couple of years. So we take the approach that even before a unit starts, we're calibrating ourselves as teachers to go, okay, well, by the end of the term, this is exactly what we're going to be looking for. So, if we've started Unit 1 in Term 1 and we're going to do it, for all of Term 1, we'll go back to last year and have a look at those worked examples again.
Yes.
And that really calibrates across, a teaching team, if you've got numerous teachers on the same unit, to really establish where the standards are, where we're going. And it also helps us to plan as well. If we're explicitly teaching around, the students having great assessment pieces at the end, then it really gives us the opportunity to go, this is, where we're looking for, and does our unit plan align to that? And quite often what we found is that throughout the years, if you're teaching the same unit, you have some learning experiences, you have some lessons in there which they might be fun, they might be engaging, but do they really align to where we're heading as in the assessment piece? Maybe not. So, that one could be put on the back burner for another day. So we're doing that during the assessment, during the unit, we're again calibrating. So if we get to the drafting stage, we're moderating across the team. And then, of course, afterwards, when we're giving that final assessment piece, we're moderating again to make sure we've got consistency across all of our judgments. The very last piece to that, just to touch on that. So, for example, I'm on holidays now, but our Year 12 work wasn't due until week 10 of Term 1.
Okay.
So myself and my head of department are sending each other assessment pieces back and forward over the holidays, just to make sure we're marking consistently. So yes. I'll send him just a sample. I won't give him any comments on what I'm thinking around the marking of it. He's assessed that. He's sent it back to me, and we found that while we're a mark or two different on each criteria, the end result is, we're about the same. So it's really important to do that, especially in the senior world, because stuff gets sent away to the QCAA anyway, and the last thing you want is for that to come back with marks knocked off, or you're underscoring marks as well. So I think finally, on top of that, moderation also involves feedback around how the unit went. So not only just the assessment, it's looking back on that whole unit as a whole and going, well, what do we need to change for next time before we go forward?
That totally makes sense. So the next question and the last question for today's interview is that how do you measure your impact of teaching on your student learning?
Yeah. So again, I'll probably look at quantitative and qualitative data there.
Yes.
Of course, you can look at your outcomes with the students, and look at whether they've made progress there. That's probably the easy part. So, looking at your data, how many students did you have A, or A, or passing as a whole. But also, I think throughout the unit, there's that formative assessment opportunities that are so important. You really should know where students are going to be even before they're going into their final assessment piece. So, and again, that probably comes back to students understanding their learning intentions, making those very, very clear, and students understanding, how to gauge their own process throughout the unit. So, are they able to tell you? And we sort of have administration walkthroughs throughout the term as well, where they'll come into your class and I'll ask students, so how do you get an A for this subject? And if your students can explain that, I think, you've definitely made an impact as a teacher. And they'll ask, well, where do you think you're going to go? And they'll say, oh, look, at the moment, I'm probably sitting on a C, but if I work hard, I'm going to B, and this is how I'm going to do it. I think if you're having those sort of conversations with your students and they're able to explain that very clearly, then you're definitely making an impact throughout the unit. There's also, your formalized processes of checkpoints and your drafting process, that you can implement throughout. And then there's also the informal things in your class activities. So, if you're talking to students and at the end of the lesson, you can ask students, well, did you reach the learning goal today? And you get some sort of, indication, or five fingers, anything like that. That's also very important. I also like to use, spontaneous quizzes. So, you've got a lot of tools at your disposal these days, all those online ones like Kahoot and Blooket, where you can set up as a bit of a data capture around student knowledge. So you're purely testing the knowledge of students on that content. And that, while it's fun and engaging, it might only be 5 or 10 minutes at the end of the lesson, but it gives you really important feedback about where students are sitting as well.
Yes. And I think that allows students to just take the responsibility of their own learning. If you're setting like learning intentions and then asking the question you said, how do you achieve this grade?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a really good way, actually.
And look, it takes time. And the hard part is that we're also strapped for time, I suppose. We've got so much content to get through within 10 weeks in a term, or whether it be a 4-week unit or whatever. But if you can take the time to get students to assess their own progress, it's so much more powerful than anything you can give them.
Yes. So yes, it's a great interview. It's been a really good interview with you, and I really enjoyed your interview, and I think it was the most informative interview for me so far.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, Aaron. I really appreciate your efforts towards this curricular assessment.
Not a problem at all. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.